Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Now, my video consistency has been really bad. Sorry to all my regular viewers. There's just been a lot going on. It's the end of the month, so anyone who is new to this video, we shop every 6 weeks. So we're coming up to the end of the 6 weeks. I go shopping in a week. So food always becomes a bit more challenging towards the end of the 6 weeks. It takes a little bit more effort, a little bit more brain power and that sort of thing to get it appropriate. And then there's also the planning for the next grocery trip, which also takes brain power. It's also end of financial year, and I do some financial transcription contract work on the side. And there's all just the back end stuff that needs to be done with the YouTube and everything else. So in saying that, it's just been a really busy couple of weeks this couple of weeks. We also bought new computers for the kids. So the kids have, we have had a few consoles and computers around. We do the Minecraft education and reading eggs and all that sort of stuff. But we're getting to the point where we kind of needed a screen for each child for some of the tasks that were being done. So they all had the ability to log into their own accounts and track their progression through things and stuff like that. So I managed to get some refurbed computers from a government agency here. It was in WA actually, but posted to us, so we had to buy them, and then we had to get new desks to be able to put them on. So we got, you know, the wooden panels from Bunnings with the legs, so you attach the legs to the wooden panels, so we had some more desk space. And then the mice that we bought didn't work. It was all just a bit of a, you know, and we had to rearrange to be able to fit everything in. So it's just been a busy couple of weeks. So I'm a bit behind. So I've got 2 videos here that I'm going to voice over while I'm standing out here. I've got Darryl making lunch inside, and I'll get these voiced over so that I can release them in the next couple of days, and then I might have a bit of a chat video Sunday or Monday because I missed last week's one because it was just a bit too much. So today's video was doing the Wonderbag again. So I've been playing with the Wonderbag and figuring out what's going to work and things like that, and I wanted to show you my second attempt that I did at it. So this is that amongst other things, the Wonderbag is one of the big parts of this video though. So let me voice over that for you and show it to you, and then I'll get on with the rest of them, and hopefully I'll catch up a little bit. Alright, so if you've been following along, I bought the beef trim from Costco. So this was 20 kilos of beef offcuts that they use to make their mince. I was looking for another way to buy mince from Costco that wasn't in the pre-packaged packaging, because I find that it bleeds all over everything in the course of the transport from Costco to home in the eskies and everything else, and it has to be used within 24-48 hours because it's been minced. So when I went and asked, we bought this beef trim. So if you've been watching, you'll have seen it. I'll try and link a couple of cards, maybe a video showing me I think yes, the last video I released showed me cutting it up. So it works out $9.99 a kilo, which is the same price as the mince, which is a lot cheaper than buying beef in a lot of other ways. So normally we don't eat beef a whole lot because it's just too expensive, but we really enjoy it. So being able to buy it at $10 a kilo is going to allow us to implement it more into what we eat, which is fantastic. So the beef trim that I did when I sorted it yesterday, I cut up lots of cubes of it as well. So yes, it wasn't yesterday, the last video, whenever it was. So I minced up a whole lot of the beef to use as mince, to use in bolognese and hamburgers and things like that. And then I kept aside a whole lot of it that I had cubed up into little stew cubes, basically. Some that was not too lean but not too fatty to be used in stew cubes. I didn't want to keep anything that was excessively fatty because I didn't intend to slow cook any of this. We were using the Wonderbag, which whilst it is a non-electrical slow cooker, it's not going to, it still doesn't maintain the heat as high as a slow cooker would. So it's still not quite slow cooking. It also only holds heat for a certain amount of time, especially in the weather at the moment because it's quite cool. So I knew it would only be a 4 or 5 hour cooking time, whereas in a slow cooker you might do 8 or 9 sort of thing. So I didn't want it too fatty. So anyway, what we're going to do for this particular attempt, the last time I used the Wonderbag, I didn't use any veggies, so I didn't have that as like a measuring stick for how well it had cooked either. So this time I'm going to use plenty of veggies. So I'm going to make just a basic stew. I use my enamel lined cast iron Dutch Dutch iron, cast iron Dutch oven, so that because that holds heat really well. So I think that that's a good thing for going into this Wonder Bag, and made the stew in that. So first off, I aggressively browned the beef. So you want to salt and pepper the beef, a little bit of flour, and aggressively brown it in some oil or lard in the bottom of the pot, because that's going to create flavour in the bottom, but it's also going to seal the meat a little bit too, and it holds its shape better when you're making things. I added onions, garlic, carrot and celery and sweat them off, because if you add them to the pot, they're going to release water, which is going to help sweat them off and help with the sticky bits on the bottom. So you want to loosen those bits up on the bottom. So you weren't aiming to burn the beef, just to cook it off and create that browning, because that adds flavour. Using some of the beef stock paste I made the other day, I mixed it with about 1.2 litres of water and added it to the vegetables to get the last of those tasty bits off the bottom of the pan. So we're deglazing the pan with the stock, put the stock in there, scrape all those bits up off the bottom so that they don't burn by sitting there, though in the Wonder Bag they probably wouldn't, because there's no direct bottom heat. They'd probably just loosen up on their own, but we're going to loosen them up in the same way we normally would. I added some tomato paste to the stew as well, standard sort of a ingredient in a stew. Some of my homemade Worcestershire sauce. I really am enjoying the homemade Worcestershire sauce. It has this real sweetness to it to go with all the acidic overtones, and it's very, very nice. Definitely be making this again. Added all the potatoes that I'd cubed up and all the meat and its juices as well. So I added some dried thyme as well and a couple of bay leaves to finish it off. Now, you're going, as the instructions state, you need to keep it up at a heavy simmer, slow boil for 15 minutes so that it is well and truly heated all the way through. Basically, your beef is cooked, but it's not the kind of beef that can be eaten from that point. Like, it still needs more work. But basically, everything in there is heated all the way through to safe temperatures. And then you're going to transfer it to the Wonder Bag. Now, I have a Bluetooth temperature probe thing, but it's not working at the moment. I don't know what's wrong with it, but it just doesn't work. I don't know whether it's the probe that's got the damage or the actual unit, but this unit was a replacement one for one that got damaged by the children, and I haven't liked this one anywhere near as much, so I might need to try and find that original one again, because it was much better. And it was rechargeable by USB. This one uses batteries. I hate the ones that use batteries, because the batteries go flat always at the most inopportune time, and we have a battery charger, but the kids use the batteries for, console game controllers and their walkie-talkies, and you go there and there's no batteries in there. Anyway, squirrel. Okay, so the probe went in there, but it wasn't working, so I can't tell you any of the temperatures. So again, I put a tea towel on the bottom of the Wonder Bag, because they say to do that to make sure that you're protecting the fabric of the Wonder Bag, because you wouldn't want to wash it. You would just want to spot clean it. So put a tea towel on the bottom, put the pot in there and closed it up really nice and tight, cinched it all up really nice and tight with the lid on there, and then put it aside. So I actually put it over where the sun hits slightly, and not that there's much sun at the moment because it's winter, but put it over where the sun hits slightly and left it alone. The next thing I moved on to was pie filling. So I used about 1 kilo of beef in the stew, because we had about 3 kilos of diced beef here. So I used about 1 kilo in the stew, because that seemed to be about the right quantity for that pot, which is still a lot of beef for us who haven't been eating beef very much because it's so expensive. So 1 kilo was well and truly enough beef in that to be tasty, and it was lovely. You'll see it at the end anyway. So then I moved on to meat pie filling. So we love steak pies. I regularly can beef, cold pack, raw pack beef in no liquid to use to make our pies. But that's mainly because the beef is so expensive that I want to stretch it out. So I can the beef in the jars, and then when I want a steak pie, I use that beef out of the jars. Now, it does fall apart a lot more when it's been in the jars than this batch is going to. Pros and cons to that. But that's what we normally do. But because this was so cheap, I decided I was going to make some pies as well, and I'm experimenting with how I'm going to use this trim. If I'm going to buy 20 kilos of trim every month, then there's going to be, you don't want it to build up. You want to be able to use it in a myriad of ways over that month's worth of cooking. So I diced up plenty of carrots really nice and small. In between all this, there was lunch that needed to be made, so I mixed up a quick batch of tortilla dough to have with lunch and put that aside to rest as well. I diced up onion and garlic. I soaked some dried mushrooms in boiling water. I don't have any mushrooms in stock left on my shelf or any fresh mushrooms at the moment, so I used dried mushrooms. I soaked them up, put them into boiling water, and I'll cut them up later. I diced up celery and bacon. I added some lard to the pot and then started browning the meat the same way that I did for the stew. It's much the same process. We're sweating off the veggies after the meat, so aggressively brown the meat in batches so that it's not stewing, it's frying. Pull the meat back out, aggressively brown the next batch, etc., etc. We had 2 kilos of beef here, so that's what I'm using. That's what was left, rather than freezing it or anything else. We have plenty of stuff sorted, so I decided to use the full 2 kilos, and we'd assess the quantity of it at the end. Sweat all the veggies off after the meat was browned, then adding liquid to deglaze the pan, as we've just done before, and then get all those tasty bits up off the bottom. Now, this is a stainless steel pan, which is vaguely not really my choice for this particular style of cooking that I'm going to do, but my Dutch oven would have been too small. As you saw, it only fit 1 kilo of beef in for the other dish, and I do have an oval Dutch oven, but the lid is missing, so I need to get myself a couple more of these over time. Eventually we'll get there. Stainless steel is not ideal because we cook on gas and it gets very hot on the bottom, so it tends to burn on the bottom, so we need to make sure we get all this the bits and pieces off the bottom of the pan so that they don't continue to cook and then burn and add that burnt flavour to the food. So I sliced up the mushrooms that I had soaking in the boiling water and then put them in the pot. You could put them in whole, but some of the kids don't like mushrooms, so it's easier to dice them up. You get all the flavour, but you don't have anyone complaining about giant pieces of mushroom in their pie. And then I added the liquid as well because it's just mushroom stock, basically. Now, realistically, this needed to be done in the oven or in a slow cooker, but I was doing it in a pot, and it doesn't really work in these. As I said, the stainless steel pot, it just gets too hot on the bottom. My burners do not go low enough, even the side burner on the barbecue. I probably need a trivet to lift it up slightly higher, but it's also using gas. I don't know, maybe I should have just turned the barbecue on and put it in the barbecue as an oven, or pulled the slow cooker out, but the problem is that at the moment it's been really overcast, so I don't want to run the slow cooker even during the day because we just haven't had huge amounts of power coming into the panels because it's been so overcast. So regardless, anyway, I did it on the stove. It's supposed to be slow cooked. It got to a point where there was too much liquid being lost and it was sticking too much to the bottom that I turned it off. It was cooked, but the meat could have been cooked a little bit better, but it was cooked. So I got it to this gentle simmer, moved it from burner to burner as needed, stirred it up, and got it to where it was all done, but, you know, it would have been better done in some sort of a slow method. For lunch, I sliced up some of the beef chunks really fine, so I just grabbed a handful of those beef chunks that I had used for everything else and put them aside. I sliced them up really, really nice and fine and flash fried them with a bit of salt and pepper and a bit of seasoning, and then we had that with mayo, cabbage, and the fresh tortillas. Now, that beef was chewy because it's lean meat that we flash fried, but perfectly edible when cut really nice and thin on against the grain and then quickly flash fried. So we did that because we had it out and had the homemade mayo, cabbage, and the fresh tortillas for lunch that day. I checked the Wonderbag about 4.5 hours later, and all the veggies were soft and the meat was tender. Not quite falling apart, but very tender. I think that I need to take the beef size even smaller, to be honest. Same with the meat pie. If I had have taken the chunks to be half that size, then it would have cooked a little bit quicker and we wouldn't have had the issue with the bottom of the pan, because it is going to be cooked again in the pie. So I think I need to cut the chunks smaller again still figuring this out with the Wonderbag and everything else. I don't think the meat pie filling would cook very well in the Wonderbag. Like, I don't think I could use that for making the meat pie filling because it would be too wet because all the liquid is contained, whereas you're wanting to cook off some of the liquid. I could thicken it though, use some gravy powder, bit of flour, whatever else. But I was doing both of them at the same time anyway, and I only have one Wonderbag. But maybe it'll be worth investing in another one. I have 2 of these Dutch ovens that fit quite nicely in there, and maybe I could do that at some point. We'll see. Anyway, so the stew was tasty. Everyone enjoyed it. I didn't have any bread made at the time. Bread would have just topped it off. Some nice sourdough would have been lovely. I didn't have any bread with it, but it had plenty of veggies in it, plenty of beef, and it was nice and thick, and it was really, really nice. So that will definitely be on rotation, especially during winter, because that was just a really nice meal, and there was leftovers, which was always good. I'd also cooked biscuits throughout the day, trying to find my favourite biscuit texture. I'm still working on trying to figure out that balance between not overly sugared but still that crispy sort of a biscuit, sweet biscuit that I like anyway. So that's what's in the background there. The pie filling I put in the fridge once it was cooked because I wasn't using it at night, obviously because we had stew for dinner. So, and when you're filling a pie case, you want it to be cold anyway. So once the pie filling was cooked, it was left to cool, and then it was stuck in the fridge for the next day. So of course, the next day we had that pie filling. So I mixed up some pie crusts first up. I use a fairly standard recipe: 400 grams of flour, 60 grams of olive oil, 60 grams of lard, and about 110 grams of ice water with a pinch of salt. This can fluctuate a little bit, as any dough product does, depending on the ambient humidity and temperatures, because flour products, dough products, the humidity and temperatures impact how well they hydrate. So you have to be aware of that, but that's around about right. I tried making a double batch in the Thermomix and it really didn't like it. It didn't come together very well, and the weather was a bit humid, so I ended up having to put half of it back with a drizzle more water and then the other half back in. So I pulled it all out, split it in half, and then food processed half of it and then food processed the other half. So this is enough for 2 pie crusts, top and bottom. And you want it into that crumbly texture, and then you bring it together on the board. So it just didn't work in the Thermomix unless I could have really overworked it and got it together in the Thermomix, but you don't want to overwork pie crust. So anyway, I did it the other way. After the dough had rested for a couple of hours in the fridge, I rolled one of the sets out to make the pie for dinner. So rolling pie dough is definitely not a forte of mine, and in fact I kind of suck at pie dough until fairly recently. I could never get the texture right. It was always too short. It crumbled on me. So I'm really happy with how it works these days. Every pie I've made in the last few months has been near perfect. The crust, if I let the pie sit long enough to slice properly, you can pick the pieces up and they hold together. The dough is nice and crumbly when you bite it, nice and crisp and flaky when you bite it, but it doesn't crumble to nothing in the meantime. So I'm really happy with this pie crust. I highly recommend the mix of lard and olive oil, especially for those who can't use butter. It works very well. So the pie dish that I'm using is a cast iron dish. It's very deep. I don't have any pie dishes at the moment. I did have a couple of stoneware pie dishes, but because we use open gas flame, the kids broke one and one cracked on the barbecue. So no good me buying stoneware pie dishes. There is some really nice cast iron ones on Amazon. I just haven't got around to getting them. So I will at some point, this deep dish pie isn't a bad thing, except that when you're getting pie out of it, you end up scratching the enamel because it's enamel lined. Whereas the cast iron ones that are actually cast iron, you wouldn't have that issue. So I think that would be better in the long run. And they're shallower, more pastry, less filling, which has its pros and cons. So anyway, it was deep dish, so I only make one for all 8 of us, and it uses about 1 kilo of meat with all the veggies and stuff. So about half of the pie filling that I made filled this pie dish. So I rolled out the pastry, laid it over the pie dish, filled it well with filling. I didn't add any thickener to the pie filling, and I probably should have. As it heats back up, it's going to be quite wet, but I'm not overly fussed, and the pie doesn't have to look good. It's going to be eaten hot, and we're not going to let it rest, so it doesn't really matter. So I filled the dish with the pie filling. You want the filling to dome slightly in the middle so that the pie is well and truly filled. And you roll out and place the top crust on as well. Now, knowing that this pie is going to be quite wet, I made sure to tuck all the pastry into the top of the pie dish with no overhang, because if I had any pie crust overhanging, then the juices of the pie would go over the side, and they'd just mess everything up. Like, they'd make a mess on the barbecue and smell like it was burning. So I pushed it all into the pie crust so that it was all tucked in, and all the juices should just go the sides of the pie and over that pie crust. Again, not necessarily the most aesthetic looking pie, but we're not going for super pretty. There was enough filling for 2 pies, so I put the rest of the filling into a freezer dish for another pie later on in the month. So I put the pie crusts and the pie filling in the freezer for later on. I served the pie with mashed potatoes. We just like to just cut up the potatoes, skin and all, steam them, and then I just mash them with a spoonful of ghee and a little salt. The pie had plenty of gravy in it. The pastry still cooked through and was lovely and crisp. As I said, it was short but not too short, which is something I've really been aiming for. I do very much enjoy this pastry, and it is very forgiving to being handled. So, as I said, you don't want to overwork pie dough. pie crust, but this particular one I pulled out of the Thermix because it wasn't coming together, split it in half, and then added a touch more water and re-kneaded it, and then all that sort of thing. So, and it was very forgiving to that, which is really nice. So now I have a frozen pie of the pie filling and the pastry and the dough crust in the freezer. Now, I've never made, like this particular pie crust that I'm making, I've never tried it frozen. Like, I've never tried rolling it out. Obviously, you defrost it and roll it out. I've never tried freezing it and then using it. So that'll be an interesting one. I'll have to show you later on in the month when I make that to see how that works out. And the pie filling from frozen, again, it's no reason it shouldn't work. And I suppose I probably could have built the pie, like put the pie crust down and then put the pie filling in it and then frozen it whole, but that would have taken up a whole lot more freezer room. So I just put the Ziploc bag in with the pie crust on top of the dish with all the pie filling in it in the freezer and let it go. So we will see how it goes later on in the month. I'll share that with you when I make it. And we really enjoyed the pie. It was really nice. So yeah, using this beef trim in a myriad of ways that we're going to enjoy. Beef that we haven't really had a chance to use too much before because it's just too expensive. Really enjoying that, and you know, we can do more of the birria and all that sort of thing. So it's really great. I'm going to be buying these boxes each 6-week period, so you'll see plenty of this over that time, and we'll figure out how we want to use it and what we want to use it for, and different beef meals that we haven't been able to have for a while because it's just been a bit too expensive. So thank you for joining me again today, and I will see you on the next video. Thanks, guys.